Today's video is all about the new Pat McGrath Star Wars collection. I have one of the new quints that came out with this collection, as well as 2 of the 4 single eyeshadows that came out in this collection. These are called the Chromaluxe Artistry Pigment, so I have 2 shades of those to show you as well. So if you'd like to find out all about these new Pat McGrath products, just keep on watching. Before we get into it, if you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would love for you to consider doing so. I like to focus on high-end, luxury, and indie makeup. And I like to do a combination of reviewing new products, demoing new products, as well as dipping into my collection and playing with some of my older makeup. So if all of that sounds good to you, I would love for you to consider subscribing. So now let's get into these new eyeshadows from Pat McGrath. Since I'm holding one of these pigment pots, let's start out with these. So these Chromoluxe eyeshadows have the Star Wars Pat McGrath logo on the top of them, and they have one of these little protective covers inside to protect the product. And that is what the shadow looks like in the pot. So this one is the shade Falcon Noir. And the other shade I got of these is called Smuggler's Spice. And it's this one here, this beautiful kind of duochrome type shade. I'm first going to swatch these so you can see them on my fingers as well as on my hand. Then I'm going to show you each shade as a single shadow all over my lids. So these are the 2 shades, Falcon Noir and Smuggler's Spice. And here they are swatched. And here they both are swatched on my eyelids. I found these quite easy to work with. I really wasn't sure what to expect in terms of the texture of these shadows. Just from reading the descriptions online and seeing pictures, I wasn't sure if they were going to be cream shadows or kind of hybrid cream powder shadows. But I find these to be actually quite powdery. I don't think of these as creams at all. They just feel like pressed powdery pigments, and they actually do have a little bit of a dry texture to them, but they seem to be very finely milled, and so they go on the skin very smoothly. In terms of comparisons, I definitely wanted to compare this shade from the Pat McGrath Divine Rose 1 palette. I think it's VR Rose Venus. I'll put up the name on the screen if that's not correct. So that's what that looks like, and you can see it's the same colors that are in there. You've got the kind of pinky coral base and then the golden reflect. So those shades are basically the same. I think it just comes across a little bit more intense with the one from the Divine Rose palette, just because of the way that shadow is formulated. It's a baked shadow, and so it has a bit more of a high shine feel, where you're getting almost more of a kind of satiny metallic effect from the Chromoluxe. And then for Falcon Noir, I wanted to compare one of the shades in Pat McGrath's holiday palette from last year. This is Celestial Odyssey, and there is a shimmery kind of blackened charcoal type shade right there. That's what that looks like on the finger, and swatched. So not too different, actually. I think the tones are quite similar. The one from the palette comes across a little bit darker. Eva's just come onto my lap here. But again, the one from the Chromoluxe pot just has a little bit of a softer reflect to it, so it comes across a little bit more like a kind of satiny metallic as opposed to the stronger metallic with a lot of shimmer in it that we get from the one in the Celestial Odyssey palette. Also wanted to quickly compare this navy blue shade from the Sith Seduction palette, which I'll be getting more into later on in this video, just because, again, when I was looking at these products online, I wasn't sure if it was going to be redundant for me to get the Falcon Noir in the pot, because I wasn't sure how similar it would look to this navy blue shade in the palette. But they are quite different, so I just wanted to show you that in swatch. So there's the navy blue from the palette, and you can see it comes across a lot more as a blue, whereas Falcon Noir is a lot more of a charcoal black type color, and the textures are very different too. A ton of shimmer and sparkle and texture in it, where we have a more smooth finish with Falcon Noir. I just received these products yesterday at the time I'm filming this, so today is the first time that I've put any of these on my eyes. And I will say I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the Chromoluxe pots, just because, one, I was expecting a little bit of a creamier texture, but I was also expecting a little bit more shine and reflect and just kind of interest in these shadows. So I wanted to try swatching them wet and see if that would make a difference. So I'm definitely seeing more interest coming through in the Smuggler's Spice shade. It looks shinier and you're really seeing that duochrome flip quite strong. But I'm not seeing that much difference with Falcon Noir. So I'm still a little bit underwhelmed by that one. And I do feel like Smuggler Spice is a little bit unnecessary if you already have the Divine Rose palette with that duochrome that I swatched before. Unless you are looking for that type of a shade or duochrome with a less shiny, less reflective finish, then the Chromoluxe would be your way to go. But for me, I would rather have that shade with more shine and more dimension. So I'm not fully sold on these Chromoluxe pots yet. I'll have to play with them more and try different techniques with them to fully form my thoughts on them. But in my first impressions, I'm not incredibly inspired by these Chromaluxe pots, at least in these two shades that I got. Now let's get into this Sith Seduction palette. Just wanted to swatch this palette first. There are a lot of textural shadows in this palette. These are all metallics or sparkling metallics. So there's a lot of texture and shimmer. And I will tell you, I got quite a lot of fallout from that Dark Destiny shade when I was applying it on my lid. You may be able to see it in the demo, but I'm not sure if it will fully come across. So here's the first shade in the palette. You can see that incredible shine on there. Really, really beautiful. That is the shade Imperial. And then we have Dark Destiny. It seems to have almost a little bit of a more sheer base with a lot of texture on top of it. Then we have Mustafar Heat, which is really the star of this palette. I don't think it's going to come across fully on camera, but the level of shine on this is really exceptional. It has to be one of my shiniest eyeshadows ever. And it's very smooth feeling in the pan, so it's more of a metallic than a kind of sparkly metallic like the blue shade. Just this very shiny molten copper shade. It almost looks like a duochrome, maybe because of how shiny it is. It looks like it has the kind of orangey copper base with a more yellowy gold reflect. And then we have Galactic Conquest, which is the beautiful kind of deep olive. This one is a little bit more similar to the blue in terms of the texture of it, although it seems to have a bit more of an opaque base than the blue. And lastly, we have Force Sensitive, kind of a pale beigey bronze with maybe a little touch of that kind of sagey undertone, but it also has a brownish undertone. I can even see a little bit of rosiness in there. And I can see a little bit of rosiness in this shade here as well, this Imperial shade. So that is the palette. Really beautiful, a lot of texture, a lot of shine. If you're not into metallics, you definitely wouldn't like this. And if you're not into textural, kind of shimmery, glittery shadows, I don't think you'd like this either. But if you do like those things, this could be a great palette for you. So I wanted to now get into my demo of this eye look. I used all of the shades in this palette for this look. And I started out with the Nars Tinted Smudge Proof eyeshadow base as a primer. I used the light shade. So I come into this demo with that already on my lids. Off camera, I finished off this eye look with my Victoria Beckham Olive Satin Kajal liner. Just did my normal lining of the upper lash line and then a tiny touch on the outer part of the lower lash line, and just kind of smudged that out a little bit to finish off the look, and added some mascara just on the top lashes. And just for a couple of comparisons for this eyeshadow palette, as you may know, the Midnight Sun palette was re-promoted as part of this collection, and there are a couple of shades in here that I wanted to compare to the Sith Seduction palette. The first is this one here, which I think is called Blood Moon 003 or something along those lines. Blood Moon something. So that's that. That's another baked shade. So none of the shades in Sith Seduction are baked, but I think these colors look quite similar. And you can see there that they are quite similar colors. There's a little bit more depth perhaps in the one from Sith Seduction. And the texture of the shade from Sith Seduction is much more smooth, where we get a little bit more dimensionality from the texture in the Midnight Sun shade. I think this would look beautiful over top of Mustafar Heat because it will add the same kind of colors, but just a more dimensional texture. And then I also wanted to take a look at Wicked Envy, which is the olive in the Midnight Sun palette, compared to Galactic Conquest. There's that. And again, we have very similar colors here. Wicked Envy isn't a baked shade, so it's a similar feeling formula, just a more traditional powder metallic. It has a little bit more warmth in it, just a touch, but very, very similar colors there. And in this case, we get more texture and shine from the shade in the new palette compared to the one in the Midnight Sun, which is looking more like a satin metallic type shade. Since we're here, let's also take a look at this metallic in Midnight Sun, and we'll compare that to Force Sensitive. You can see it's deeper, a little bit more of a true bronzy shade. It doesn't have that beigey feel that we get from Force Sensitive. And then the Skin Show shade, we'll compare that to Imperial. There. Much lighter, very different type of shade actually, much lighter and cooler toned. Of the products I bought from this collection, I do prefer the palette to the single eyeshadows, at least right now. That's my feeling. The quality of the shadows in this palette is excellent. I find them quite easy to work with. I did have those fallout issues with the navy blue shade in here, so just keep that in mind. Ideally, I probably would have done my eyes before my base, but that's just not my normal method for doing my makeup, so I prefer not to do that unless I absolutely have to. I was able to clean up the fallout fairly easily though. I look forward to playing with this palette more. I think it's quite nice to have both the deep olivey green and the deep navy blue in this palette. Those are types of shades that I've been enjoying working with a lot lately. So I like to have them both in this palette, and then to also have the kind of mid-toned and then the lighter metallic to pair with them, I think is very useful and makes it very easy to create really quick and easy looks with just like maybe 2 or 3 shadows. I also think that this shade here would make a great one and done shadow. And the coppery orange is just quite special. The texture of it and the incredible shine is really quite spectacular, and it's fun to have this pop of a very warm shade in this palette of more neutral and cool leaning shades. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoy. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. I always love to see those. If you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would love for you to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.